They thought the snowstorm would keep the skinwalkers away, but they were wrong. 3 true Skinwalker Ranch horror stories. The last story is shocking. Our research team had always heard the chilling rumors about Skinwalker Ranch, but the prospect of investigating during winter felt oddly safe. Snow cloaked the desolate landscape, muffling the eerie silence that hung in the air. We figured the bitter cold would suppress whatever forces haunted the land. We were wrong. The first 2 days passed without incident. Snowstorms came and went, and we spent the time cataloging the area and studying reports from previous investigators. On the second night, just as a storm set in, Daniel, one of our team members, noticed something strange. A line of tracks near the tree line. They were enormous, wolf-like prints that seemed to circle the cabin from a distance. "It's probably a big coyote or stray dog," Daniel shrugged. The rest of us weren't so sure. The prints were too large and spaced too widely to be from any animal we knew. By the time night fell, the storm had intensified. The wind wailed against the windows, and snow pelted the roof like relentless fingers tapping. We huddled in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with light conversation when it happened. The sound of distinct, deliberate tapping against one of the windows. At first, we thought it was snow sliding off the roof, but then the tapping grew louder and rhythmic, almost purposeful. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and shone it through the frosted glass. We saw nothing but swirling snow outside. "It's just the wind," he said, but his voice carried unease. We were about to settle back when the tapping returned, followed by something far worse. A voice. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it unmistakably called out, mimicking Daniel's voice. "It's just the wind." My blood turned to ice. The voice came from the other side of the wall. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the storm again, and I saw the flicker of a shadow, something impossibly tall and thin moving just out of sight. We locked the doors and sat in silence, too scared to move. The tapping turned to pounding, and the voice began to call out our names. "Daniel. Sarah. Open the door." The worst part was how perfectly it mimicked each of us. It would speak in Daniel's voice, then mine, then even the tone of our boss, who wasn't even on the trip. By morning, the storm had let up, and we cautiously stepped outside. The tracks were back, only this time they circled closer to the cabin, tightening in concentric loops. At the edge of the porch, claw marks ran across the wooden planks, and a single handprint, half human, half animal, marred the frost-covered window. The third night, Daniel snapped. The voice had been calling his name all evening, louder and louder, until he threw on his coat and bolted out the door. "Where are you going?" I shouted, but he was already swallowed by the storm. I hesitated, torn between following him and staying safe inside. When I finally stepped outside, there was no sign of him, only his footprints leading into the trees. I followed them for what felt like hours until they stopped abruptly, as if he had vanished into thin air. Beside his last print were those same monstrous tracks, circling and weaving in impossible patterns. I never saw Daniel again. Search parties found no trace of him, and I've been haunted by those nights ever since. Sometimes on cold, snowy evenings, I still hear his voice calling my name, but I know better than to answer. Winter had hit Skinwalker Ranch harder than usual, and the snow piled in drifts taller than the barn doors. Our family had been caretakers of the property for a few months, tasked with tending the livestock even during the coldest months. We'd heard the stories about the ranch but dismissed them as local legends, until that winter night when everything changed. The first sign something was wrong came with the animals. Our livestock, normally calm, even in storms, began acting erratically as the sun dipped below the horizon. The horses stomped and whinnied in their stalls, and the sheep refused to settle. By the time the sky turned pitch black, every creature in the barn was trembling with fear, their eyes fixed on the far corner. I offered to check it out. With a lantern in hand, I pushed open the barn door, the icy wind biting at my face. The warmth of the barn should have been comforting, but instead, it felt heavy, like the air was pressing down on me. The animals didn't take their eyes off the corner. When I swung the lantern's light, I saw them. 2 glowing, icy blue eyes staring back at me. They were set high, too high for any normal animal. My first thought was a wolf, but the eyes didn't blink and the shadowy figure behind them was elongated, its limbs unnaturally thin. "Get out of here," I shouted, trying to scare it off. Then it did something that made my blood freeze. It repeated my words back to me in a deep, distorted version of my own voice. "Get out of here." I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The creature stepped forward, still cloaked in shadow. It was tall, hunched, and seemed to ripple as if it were barely tethered to this world. Slamming the barn door shut, I ran back to the house, breathless and trembling. My wife and kids looked at me with wide eyes as I stammered out what I'd seen. They didn't question me, especially when the barn door creaked open on its own moments later. From the safety of the house, we watched as the creature emerged, its movements jerky and unnatural. It circled the house slowly, claws scraping along the siding as if testing the structure. At one point, it stopped at a window, peering in with those unearthly blue eyes. When it began mimicking our voices, calling out to us in distorted, overlapping tones, we shut off every light and huddled in silence. The scraping stopped just before dawn, and when we finally dared to look outside, the barn was wrecked. Deep gouges scored the wood, and strange prints, half human, half animal, led away into the snow. We left Skinwalker Ranch shortly after, but I'll never forget those glowing eyes in the darkness. Even now, on cold winter nights, I can still hear the faint echo of my own voice calling me back to that cursed place. If you're enjoying so far, remember to like and subscribe. This last story still sends a shiver down my spine. Skinwalker Ranch during the winter was a nightmare frozen in time. My group of friends and I had set out to camp there for one night, as a dare. The idea of spending a frigid December evening surrounded by snow, frost-covered trees, and endless legends of supernatural horrors seemed ridiculous, until the nightmare began to unfold. The trip started with eerie calm. The snow crunched beneath our boots as we trudged across the property to find a good camping spot. Eventually, we settled by a frozen lake. Its surface gleamed like black glass under the pale moonlight. It seemed serene at first, but something about its perfect stillness unnerved me. As we set up camp, I noticed faint, uneven footprints etched into the snow along the lake's edge. They were spaced far apart, as if someone, or something, had taken impossibly long strides. The prints led onto the lake's frozen surface, then stopped abruptly, as if the walker had sunk straight through. Probably an animal, one of my friends suggested, though even they sounded unsure. We tried to ignore the strangeness as we lit a fire and warmed our hands. The air was bitterly cold, and the stillness of the night pressed against us like a weight. That's when we first heard it, a low, resonant hum coming from the direction of the lake. It vibrated through the ground, subtle but unrelenting. "What is that?" one friend whispered, staring into the darkness. The hum grew louder, then stopped altogether. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, without warning, there was a thunderous crack. It echoed across the property, and we watched in horror as a long fissure snaked its way across the lake's icy surface, zigzagging like lightning frozen in time. We scrambled to our tents, hoping the fire would ward off whatever had caused the disturbance. But as the night wore on, the sense of being watched became unbearable. I swore I could see faint figures on the far side of the lake, their silhouettes barely visible in the moonlight. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell into an uneasy sleep. I woke to the sound of scratching, long, deliberate strokes coming from beneath the ice. It sounded like claws scraping against the frozen lake, each movement deliberate and insistent. I shook my friends awake, and we all listened in terrified silence. Then, the whispering began. It sounded like dozens of voices, overlapping and indistinct, rising from beneath the ice. The whispers grew louder, forming words and languages we couldn't understand. Finally, a single voice cut through the cacophony, a guttural, inhuman growl that sent chills down my spine. "Leave," it commanded. We didn't hesitate. Grabbing only the essentials, we bolted toward the tree line. As we ran, I glanced back and saw something emerging from the fractured ice. Its form was a shifting amalgamation of limbs, fur, and bone, as if it couldn't decide what shape it wanted to take. Its glowing eyes locked onto me, and I swear I heard it laugh, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the freezing air. We made it to the car and sped off the property, leaving everything else behind. The authorities later dismissed our account as a case of overactive imaginations mixed with hypothermia, but I know what we saw. Even now, I dream of that frozen lake and the thing beneath it, waiting for the ice to break again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, remember to like and subscribe for more videos like this one.